much for joining me for a Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Chester. You guys know what I like to do on my show. I want to enlighten you. I want to inspire you. I want to empower you to become your best self. Now, Scripture reminds us that the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. Today, that's what we want to do with our guest. I will be talking with Roger Buttersworth today about his book, The Boy Killian. Now, go on, get comfy. You know what I'm going to tell you to do? Get cozy. Get your coffee or get your tea because we are about to get started. Hello, Roger. Thank you so much for joining me here on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela.
Hi, Dr. Angela.
Thank you so much for being on with me today. Now, I cannot wait to talk to you about your book, but as is tradition around here, we always give our guests an opportunity to introduce themselves to perhaps those folks out there that are unfamiliar with you or your work. So first question to you, Roger, is tell us a little bit about yourself. What makes you, you?
Well, professionally, I'm a podiatric surgeon, a foot surgeon, although I'm now retired. Although I'm English, I've lived in Ireland for the last 40 years, and the book that I've written is based on my last 20 years of experience of living in the Irish Republic, although it would have a more general theme in terms of child sexual abuse internationally. It's not really related to my professional activities as such. It really develops from the experience of having my own daughter abused.
Now, being an author, is that something that you've always wanted to do, or did you find that this was simply the best way to get this information to the masses?
Probably both. Historically, I've always written quite a lot, particularly because I was in teaching for a long time and I wrote student handbooks and the like. In 1992, I co-authored and co-edited and part-authored a book on forefoot surgery with some American colleagues, which went to 4 international editions and sold for 20 years. So that was quite unbelievable. And then when I came to live in Ireland and was faced with the prospect of coping with these abused boys, I really started to write as a therapy. And the therapy just evolved into the book which I'm now publishing.
Mm-hmm. Now, the title of your book, many authors will say the title came to them first and they kind of wrote the story around the title. Others have said, oh no, I went through 4 or 5 different working titles before we finally settled on this one. Can you tell us, how did the title of your book come about?
Well, originally I wrote the book in real time using real names, but because of the controversial nature of the text, I had to anonymize it. So the title, if you like, was one that I chose to hide the identities of the people involved. But at the same time, I used the name Killian because the boys concerned were themselves Irish.
Now, I always ask the question this way because I give graduation gifts to high schoolers, and it's a way of them taking a piece of home with them off to college, but it also gives them something to read and many times will expand their mindset. With that being said, is this book appropriate for someone who is high school age and older, or who is the target market for your book?
I would have reservations about saying it's suitable for high school students. When I first finished the book, I gave it to a friend of mine who was a literary agent, and she couldn't cope with it. She said what I'd written was so awful, it was giving her nightmares, which is why I eventually contacted Bookline, and they agreed to publish it for me. So it's not perhaps a book entirely suitable for younger readers. On the other hand, one way and another, I seem to develop quite a broad experience of dealing with abuse and the methods of abuse, and in particular, although I'm not a professional, both the psychiatric and the legal aspects. And in publishing the book, I'm hoping that it will give people like myself, really, who've had to deal with the problems of abuse, some guidance as to, how to go, as to where to go and how to go about it.
Now, when reading your book, how do you suggest that one read it? I usually ask it this way. Should we read it cover to cover, meaning simply page after page? Should we take it in chapter or section at a time before moving on to the next chapter or section? Or do you suggest perhaps read a few pages, put it down, let that information digest, and then move on to the next set of pages? What's your suggestion there?
Well, it's probably best to be read from beginning to the end, but because of the, what I now recognise as the traumatic nature of the manuscript, you're probably better just reading a few pages at a time, just to give yourself time to absorb it and, recover from what I'm saying, particularly when it comes to the statements of abuse that were given to the police. I mean, they are particularly traumatic, and I think that people to try and read the book from beginning to end, it would be just difficult. I don't think it's really possible. Having said that, some of the chapters, particularly later on in the book, there's a book on homosexual prostitution and a couple of other chapters, which you could read independently of the rest of the book. But obviously they relate indirectly to the main text.
Now, was there a particular moment in your adult life where you realized that you really needed to get involved and help children who are survivors of any form of sexual abuse? Some people have a nudging where someone says, you're really good at the way that you interact with the kids, or, the way you explain it to the adults or the caretakers of the children. Did you have such prompting or nudging that really helped you make the decision that this is what you needed to do?
Not really. What happened was that I discovered that retrospectively, I discovered that my eldest daughter had been badly abused by her stepfather. And in the trauma of the circumstances, I actually lost touch with her for about 10 years. But, after that experience, I was attuned to the possibility of sexual abuse. So when I met this boy, Killian, I picked up fairly quickly on the fact he'd been abused and asked him about it. And the whole thing evolved from there. Now, perhaps two things came from that. One is that there was a cathartic element to it in the sense that helping Killian also helped me cope with the problems of abuse, because it's not just the child that suffers. This affects whole families. The other thing was that helping him and a couple of other lads, who were up in court and going to prison and all the rest of it, I became fairly knowledgeable as to the legal procedures involved. And when I really recontacted my daughter, who had a dreadful life, she'd been to prison twice for antisocial behaviour and drugs and things, and I was able to stop her going to prison for a third time, get her the therapy she needed, and also, of course, save my grandson being put into care. So that was, if you like, the origins of my involvement with these lads, and I've just continued with it ever since. And to this day, I'm still involved with them, helping them, looking after them. But then now, of course, 20 years later, I know what needs to be done.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I find that your caring spirit about it all and wanting to still connect with her and be there for her really speaks a lot about who you are and wanting to not have that void there in your life. I'm so glad that you were able to reconnect there. Now, how did you find this experience to affect your child?
Well, as I say, as far as my daughter was concerned, I discovered what had happened retrospectively, and basically just wasn't able to cope. It was too close to home. I had my instinct, in fact, was to put my shotgun in the back of the car and shoot the bastard that abused her. It was fortunate that I had a friend who she knew and trusted, and with whom she identified quite closely. So essentially, it was this friend of mine that helped my daughter out initially, because, as I say, I finished up not in psychiatric care, but I finished up with a psychiatrist, just trying to get my head around what had happened and getting rid of this impulse to go and kill the guy. And I think quite a lot of parents of abused children, have a similar reaction. Also, I'm not sure that I would have been. I'm not sure I was the right person. I'm not sure that I would have been able to cope properly with my daughter. But at the same time, I found I could deal with other people's children when they couldn't. So this was, shall we say, the background and the motivation to the circumstances.
That definitely makes sense. I find that for many people, two things you said there. Just about every person that I have ever spoken with about abuse or even the thought of abuse against their child, hands down, parents will say, "Oh my goodness, I would just lose it. I would do, whatever it is. I would wring their neck, or whatever it is." Yes. You're very right there. I think that most parents would feel that way. But, I like how you said that even if you did not do everything necessarily the right way with your own daughter, because it is so personal, you could help someone else. Someone else's child, or help some other parent have that conversation with their children. And you're right. Sometimes when we take a step back, we're able to help a stranger more than we're able to help a family member or a friend, just because we're too close. So I understand that. Well, John, it is time for us to go to break. But before we do, can you remind everyone, please, what is the title of your book? Where can we get a copy, and how do we stay in contact with you?
Well, the title is The Boy Killian and Other Lives, and you can get it from Amazon and wherever bookshops are. They will ultimately sell it, I believe.
Alrighty, everyone. Now you know where you can get a copy of the book. We'll be back right after this.
Discovery. No, just a sec.
What would it look like if we listened more? Could the right voice, the right set of words, bring us all just a little closer? Get us to open up? Even push us further? It could, if we took the time to listen. The most inspiring minds, the most compelling stories. Download Audible and listen for a change.
And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me here on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. My guest today is John Quarmby, and we're talking about his book, The Boy Killian. Now, John, my next question for you is the psychological approach that you needed to take, but you also needed to, on the flip side of that, take some legal, a different legal approach as well. And you kind of hinted on that. When it comes to writing a book that is so real life for so many people, you have to be careful to change the names and all of that to protect people's privacy. Can you tell us, what was that process like?
Well, it was fairly simple, really, because I think, as I explained, I wrote the book in real time using real names. And then when the book was finished and edited, I just went through and used fictitious names for myself and for the characters in the book. Partly because in some cases what I'd written was justifiably libelous, if you like, because I referred to various individuals in the clergy and the police and things like that. But also the survivors of abuse some of them actually didn't mind being identified, and in fact have even written their own books. But most of them didn't want to be identified. They didn't want people to know that they had been abused. So the anonymizing of the book was perhaps the last thing I did. When everything else was in place.
And that is one thing that I've heard a lot of people say when they're writing a story that is about something that is factual, that you do have to be very careful and be mindful of, like I said, of people's privacy and all of that. And you do, of course, change the name. So I'm glad that those who wanted to be identified were, and those who didn't were not. So thank you for that. Now, when it comes to triggers, we know that many people will read a book because they are a caretaker and they want to better understand about the lives of the person that they're taking, of who they have to take care of. With that being said, is there any type of warning, or do you lead up to those moments that might trigger someone with their own personal episode? Or do you think that it's kind of self-explanatory? Meaning, when we watch movies and right before something happens, most people will say, don't go in that room. Don't do it, because that's about to happen. Did you write your book in a very similar way?
Not really. I think when I rewrote it, I probably took those factors into consideration. And now, if you like, I've basically come down to my philosophy in dealing with these mainly boys has come down to three basic rules, which, if you like, protect them, but also protect me. Now, the first of those rules is that in a caring relationship, the carer is the most important person, and that's particularly important with sexually abused children, because they do tend to be violent, and if there's any indication of incipient violence or anything, you just get the hell out of the place. You can always go back, but you can't. Violence is never acceptable, and you have to keep yourself safe. The second rule is that I never reject allegations of abuse, although I accept them with reservation, because the traumatic nature of the abuse also changes the survivor's perception of it. In other words, they can get people mixed up and times mixed up and incidents mixed up, and that in a sense is where the psychiatrists and the social workers come in, because they're experts at sorting the wheat from the chaff. And the final rule that I have is never question these survivors directly, because that's what will trigger them. As I say, that's what will trigger their violence. I take the opportunity of letting them know that I have sympathies for people who've been abused. If I get a telephone call, I excuse it on the grounds that the person had been abused, and I didn't like to leave them hanging. But wait for them to raise the question of their abuse with you, and then perhaps ask supplementary questions, because that keeps them stable. And if they've raised the question, it's because they need to talk to somebody. I mean, the moment I'm living with a young man, and about once every 2 months he'll just walk into my study and sit down and start to talk about his abuse. The rest of the time, it's affecting his behavior, but we never actually discuss it.
And I think that when we talk about abuse in general, and you really touched on something there, is that you don't question them as if not to believe, but simply take the time to listen. And many people have expressed that same request, that have been abused, be it that it's physically or sexually or verbally. It's just someone, please just listen to me and let me share my truth, and then we can take it from there. But first and foremost, they truly do wish to be heard. And I'm glad that you're taking that step in helping someone get to the survivor side of the abuse. Now, when it comes to, again, that journey of from going through it to successfully on the other side, what are some of the outcomes, some of the positive outcomes of some of the survivors that you have been able to help? How do they look back on their lives since now they are survivors?
Well, I think, first of all, you could never undo the damage that has been done, and this is why psychiatric and social care is so important, because the psychiatrists, in a sense, aren't trying to make them amnesic, but they are, if you like, helping them to live with what happened. And the psychiatric aspect, and to a lesser extent the legal aspect, is still very important in this respect. I have to say that the outcome for a lot of the lads I've dealt with is not very successful, but simply because they've never had the help that they need, and the mortality rate amongst them is very high. Having said that, there are one or two of these lads who've been spectacularly successful. And I mean, there's one lad who, when I first met him as a trainee chef, heading for prison because of his antisocial behaviour and his drug addiction and all the rest of it. And I got him sorted out. I got him the psychiatric care he needed. And now he's a high-end international lawyer. I mean, literally working internationally, and the sky's the limit. So I think, and because he was so high-end, I actually wrote a chapter about him, and then I couldn't publish it because he's becoming so well known. People would be able to identify him. But the importance is that for survivors to realize that they can get through this, and although their lives might not have been the lives they perhaps hoped for when they were younger, they can still have successful and perhaps, more importantly, happy lives. And particularly, in the case of my own daughter, and there was another lad that I write about in the book, they in getting through the divorce, they formed successful relationships, and their children and their grandchildren have, if you like, been a huge compensation to them, for what happened. So that's one of the things I emphasize in the book. It's not the end of the world. With the right help, you can still have a successful life. Though, as I said earlier, you can't get away from the fact that you've been abused, but that in some respect perhaps makes you a better and more understanding person anyway.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that answer. Thank you so much for that. Wow. I applaud everyone who has been through an abusive relationship at whatever stage in their lives, and they are now able to create in themselves a new space to become the person that they believe that they should always be.
But they need to understand that they need to understand that in most cases they do need professional help to achieve that. And that that's one of the points I underline in the book. They do need psychiatric care. They do need social help.
It takes so much courage to take that first step and get that help that you need. It is so important. Anyone who is ready to take that step, that they do get that care and that assistance that they need, and don't think that they're not worthy of that care. To think that they are too far gone. There's not one professional that I know that would ever say that you are not your own best friend in those moments, and take that step out. As a pastoral counselor, I could not reiterate more. please seek that professional care. There is someone that is able to help you and wants to guide you through this journey to wellness. So absolutely, absolutely. Now, I want to kind of shift gears just a little bit and ask you some process questions for our aspiring authors out there. They are some of the number one folks to write in and with their various questions. And the one question that we get the most is decision-making questions. So I like to ask this one in particular, and that is determining how you would publish your book. Every author has to decide if they're going to self-publish, if they're going to use a publishing house or use professionals to help them in any way. How did you determine which way you would go?
Well, I tried a few commercial publishing houses who'd already issued books on child sexual abuse, mainly by the people who've been abused and who, if you like, had made the headlines for one reason or another. But they weren't interested. And I think it's true to say that many publishing houses really seem to be almost overwhelmed by the number of prospective authors, so that in many cases, you have to go down the self-publishing route. And in my own case, I just promised these lads that, I wouldn't let them be forgotten, and this is my way, one of the ways in which, I seek to remember them. As far as which self-publishing company to use, they're not very well advertised. The first company really wasn't the relationship wasn't really very successful. And I was actually put on to Bookline by an American broadcaster. They said, why, this is wrong with your book and that's wrong with your book. Why don't you try Bookline? And I got a far more positive feedback from Bookline, and hopefully established a fairly good relationship with them, because I have another book to publish as well, but we'll deal with this one first of all. So that's the difficulty. I think the mistake I made was that I should have perhaps done a bit more research into the number of self-publishing companies, and then compared the deals that they were offering, because there's a big variation in terms of of what they can do for you, and and the percentages they will give you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I just want to say, John, thank you so much for coming on and spending some time with us here today. Now, before I let you go, can you please remind everyone, what is the title of your book? Where can we get a copy, and how do we stay in contact with you?
The book is The Boy Killian. It's obtainable through Amazon and most of the booksellers through Bookline.
Thank you again for being a guest on the show. You could have been anywhere, but you chose to spend it with us. As always, may God continue to shine His face upon you. May you receive His grace and His mercy in all that you do. Until next time, everyone, remember that you are blessed in the Lord.